Welcome to Jesus College and the Intellectual Forum. And we're here as this is the Frankopan Hall. This is one of my favorite locations in Cambridge, by the way. Through the Intellectual Forum, we've hosted events for the past several years, and I think we're up to around 120 countries worldwide, somewhere around there. Julian knows the exact number. There's a lot of history here at Jesus College dating back to 1496. The Intellectual Forum is part of the recent history of the college, part of the recent history. The idea basically of the events that we do here, both for the Cambridge community and beyond, is essentially to open up discussion and thought and to reach beyond like just the people in the room, beyond our college community, and hopefully online where everyone is tuning in from. So that's pretty much all we need to say as a preface. This should be a wonderfully fascinating event tonight. We're going to be talking about Black tech, hacktivism, creativity, and cover this from a number of angles. So it'll be all of us and Chris joining via Zoom. So that's enough out of me for now. We will have time for question and answers. We really do want your questions, thoughts, ideas, everything in between that's going to come out of this. So I'm going to turn it over to George, and I think I can do introductions first, right?
I'll take it.
Okay, all right. Go for it.
Thanks, Alex.
All right.
Peace, everyone. Welcome. So I'm going to do a brief introduction for Chris Slow. Chris is the CTO and founding engineer of Reddit, a husband and a father to 2 children, resides in the Bay Area in California. Though a software engineer by vocation, his first attempt at a career started with finishing a PhD in experimental physics at Harvard, where he learned about the importance of modeling, critical thinking, statistics, and honestly, welding. He uses the first 3 skills regularly. The final years of his PhD were concurrent with him breaking into startups and getting accepted to the first Y Combinator class, where he subsequently met Steve and Alexis, co-founders of Reddit, and became Reddit's first employee 5 months into the company. After 5 years at Reddit, he left with Steve to work on Hipmunk as chief scientist. He's now been back at Reddit since 2015. Please join me in welcoming Chris Slow.
Hey, thanks everybody. Thanks for also taking me as a giant head in the screen as opposed to in person. I would definitely rather be there. Let me see if I can actually get the AV working, which is always the exciting part of the talk. Hold on a second. Okay, hopefully people can see slides and that gives me a bit of a voiceover. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here for a quick opening talk. And really thanks for the intro. As you said, I'm Chief Technology Officer over at Reddit. And I'm mostly here to talk about really quickly kind of our goals for the next 5 years and kind of what I'm seeing in tech. So I control my own slides, I think. I can see half my screen, so it's working cool. Okay, so I've been in the tech industry for about 17 plus years now. And in fact, I realized this morning that Reddit is going to be old enough to drink legally in the UK in a couple of months. It's turning 18 very shortly. A lot's changed since I first started. First of all, I have to remember not to call it a site, but a platform. That's a fancy way of describing a technology stack these days, because of course apps are much more the way we interact. Honestly, if I'm going to start with let me start with what hasn't changed. So what hasn't changed for us is some of our core values. So one of the things that Reddit values more than anything else is a value we call default open. And by being default open, what we mean is that we want to make sure that we are open with our communities on how we build our platform, how we protect our users, how we show our tech, how we talk about our foundations, how we set up our infrastructure. So we not only engage constantly with discussions with our own communities. In fact, I have a running joke forever that one of the primary functions of Reddit as a platform is to criticize Reddit. Basically, we constantly get banged on by our own users in that regard. It's to make sure that we are engaging in those open kind of dialogues. And so if we're going to look at the industry at large, it should come as no surprise to say that the one thing that's changing most rapidly right now is, of course, ML. We see ML as a tool to make meaningful decisions faster, to surface relevant content, to build robust products. And we're also fascinated to watch the content generation side of things. I think this is kind of an opportunity and a catastrophe all rolled into one. I think everyone's probably heard about ChatGPT these days and Stable Diffusion. I think these are tools that are going to have probably more of an impact on the way we do discourse online than what traditionally has, which has been Photoshop. It's like Photoshop on steroids to some extent. We're seeing here. In fact, I'd say for ChatGPT, it's like the first time Photoshop could be applied to text, where all of a sudden now you can have these entirely self-consistent but absolutely potentially wrong long diatribes that sound like they were generated by a human, which is ultimately very fascinating to watch. For now, we're thinking about ML though as a way to improve user experience and to improve automation on how we operate the product. We like to say, let the humans do the hard part. And we let the current state of technology keep pushing the boundary of what's considered hard. So what we want to do is basically have the tools and the technology always kind of at the edge of making things easier for humans so the humans can actually work on the interesting jobs here. And this empowers Redditors to moderate and build healthy communities ultimately. That's the goal here. And I just want to mention at the end here, like clearly for us, this is a data-driven approach. There's a lot of data in here. We also, but it doesn't necessarily mean more data. This is about better use of the data we have. We try very hard to respect our users and their privacy. And we treat that as a corollary to default open. We're not going to do things that are nefarious if we can avoid it. And so data-driven Reddit means using data to help understand what's happening in our platform, which translates into actually our users having more of a voice. We want to make sure that the signals we use are authentic and that the behaviors that they encapsulate cause the right kind of benefits to the site and to kind of an open discourse, which is our main goal. Our mission is to bring community and belonging to everyone. And I know that's a little cheesy. It's everyone talks about community these days. It's become almost a trope. We've been talking about it for a very long time. I'll say that much. And in order to achieve this and what we want to do in the next 5 years, we have to hire people who reflect the world around us. Reddit generally indexes pretty well in the English-speaking world. We're looking to expand much more for us internationally. We're mostly in the US these days, but we have offices all over the world. Well, for what amounts to being an office these days, it's very hard to get people to go into them, but it still works. We have people from all over the world. And this isn't just about hiring. It's about building infrastructure, code, products, features that bring community to everyone. And while also creating an internal work culture that's inclusive. So Reddit has and continues to be active in creating close-knit employee resource groups. Each of which has an exec sponsor. I myself am the sponsor for the Women of Reddit ERG. And we also have a nearby Women Eng group that I was also previously a sponsor for. One of our larger, or one of our other large ERGs is called Black People Reddit, which we call BPR. It's a riff off of one of major communities on Reddit, which is Black People Twitter, which is, if you haven't been there, I suggest to go there. It is freaking hilarious. It's well written. It was founded in 2017, and we created the forum where BPR members are seen, heard, and celebrated via recruiting and retention. So our teams try to work, for example, with BPR and other ERGs to expand Reddit's presence, capabilities, and opportunities, including putting diverse talent in front of hiring managers, creating partnerships to grow talent within the Black community. And additionally, across our EIGs, we have ongoing rotations of internal events where we educate and give employees a chance to feel heard. This means that we want to make sure that we are creating allyship across our company at large, and we have opportunities constantly to do that. We also do partnerships with nonprofits and external orgs like the Black Professional Tech Network, Latinas in Tech, and In and Out Tech. We also did a sponsorship of a company called Front End Foxes, which tries to encourage women engineers especially, which has been fantastic. All this is, of course, to get us more diverse talent, which ultimately helps our goals of making sure that we can bring community and belong to everyone. So we want to make sure that everyone's voice is heard, both internally and externally. And of course, obligatory, can't help but do this. We are continuing to hire. That's something we do. We're recruiting at senior levels, but we also want to make sure that we can pull junior levels, especially from academia. I like to think of our role is not just to grow the company, but to really grow talent. Everyone gets better with better talent, especially helping the early flywheel. And so we're really pushing hard into universities now for that reason. And I thank you for letting me open here. Hopefully you found this all interesting, and hopefully I didn't set off the fire alarms. Next up, please.
Thank you, Chris. That was great.
You bet.
Okay, Switch over. I am going to formally introduce George now. Before we do, we're glad you're all here. I want to briefly mention, since we have the Master of Jesus College here, we're glad you're here, Sunita. So you don't have to say anything. We're not going to put you on the spot, but welcome. Yeah, thank you for coming. So anyways, George Hofstetter, I think before I even get into this, I should mention a little bit of background that we met through Twitter, through the serendipity of online. You'll probably get into this a little bit, but I happened to read about your article, an article that happened, when you were here previously at Cambridge last summer. We got in touch, so it was one of those happenstance connection things that, yeah, I'll let you tell the full story, but I liked the idea that one of the reasons why we're doing this talk is to kind of spark discussions and interesting connections. So I'm taking way too long to do the introduction, sorry. So George is a 22-year-old software engineer, 22, God. Software engineer, university innovation fellow at Stanford. Stanford University. He's a CEO, motivational speaker, and business consultant. He started his own company at 16, GHTech Inc. What was I doing when I was 16? To help Black and brown students gain entry into technology as innovators, not just consumers. Does a lot of work connecting Black and brown students all across the US, and hopefully we'll be able to plant some seeds that will then spread across the UK and other areas. George combats systemic oppression within technology development to help marginalized communities of color use technology as an alternative tool for alternative education. Recent work, a lot of cool stuff that he's been doing. I'm sure he's going to talk about this, but California-based nonprofit Kingmakers of Oakland. We'll talk about we'll do a little snippet of the documentary, Policing of Black America, creating the Invisible Designer Series at Stanford University's D School, and writing for the University of Oxford's student paper, the Oxford Blue. So enough out of me. Welcome, George, and the floor is yours.
Peace, everyone. We're going to be premiering a documentary trailer for the first time here in Cambridge. So we're going to start that now. Let me go ahead and turn the lights off.
My grandmother always says, pray and move your feet. I feel like I'm living that.
Just making it into this ivory tower is a huge accomplishment. You need to convince yourself that you belong before you can convince other people that you belong.
We can use technology as a platform to build an educational system without the influence of white supremacy.
My name is George Hofstetter. I'm the founding CEO of GHTech Incorporated. Growing up in East Oakland, you're faced with a lot of discrimination.
We received this horrible airdrop.
And it says, I hate niggas. It's a picture of George Floyd.
George stood up in such a beautiful way.
He's one of the people we need in the world to make it a little better.
I was unintentionally preparing myself for this moment.
You can't hide light whatsoever. And if you're seeing shadows, it means there's light.
Peace, everybody. Welcome. When I was 16 years old, I started a tech company called GHTech. At GHTech, we uplift marginalized communities of color through technology. I started this company because I believe that building at the intersection of technology and social justice can change the world. I began to form this belief when I was 13 years old, competing at a hackathon in Oakland, California. A hackathon is a 3-day event where mentors from various tech companies like a Meta, a Google, a Twitter will come out in support of these youth participants in the creation of whatever project, mobile application, or website they decide to make within that 3-day period. Now, the founder of these hackathons, Halima Pryforce, puts a twist on all of his events. All of the projects generated from these youth participants must center on social impact. The first hackathon I attended was specifically designed for engineers, programmers, and designers of color. This was my first time seeing minority representation in the tech industry at all. This was my first time seeing myself outside of the media's pathological perception and stereotypes. So if you can imagine a room filled with 13 to 17-year-old students of color who are brainstorming how they can use technology to improve their environment and their material conditions, this was my first introduction into the concept of hacktivism. This hackathon fundamentally changed the way I thought about my future. Growing up in Oakland, California, I'm about 30 to 45 minutes away from Silicon Valley without traffic. Now, because of this huge gap of access that so many people refer to as the digital divide, for folks in Oakland, that Silicon Valley might as well be worlds away. And traditionally, Silicon Valley, has historically been known as the global center for technology development and innovation. Now, you may be thinking, what is a hacktivist? Who might be a hacktivist? Well, hacktivists are technologists that use their skills with computer programming to create a positive social impact. Most of the time, the way we accomplish this is through what some might call a disruptive process, hacking. Aaron Swartz was one such hacktivist. Aaron, by the age of 14, an incredible computer programmer, developed the RSS standard, later developed Infogami, which eventually merged with Reddit. There is a quote that I found in a Wired article that speaks to Aaron's character. Aaron was a coder with a conscience, a tireless and talented hacker who poured his energy into issues like network neutrality, copyright reform, and information freedom. Aaron Swartz committed suicide after he wrote a program that it would illegally download millions of academic articles from the JSTOR subscription database at MIT, with plans to release those academic articles to the public for free. I like to describe hacktivists such as Aaron as non-traditional problem solvers that are using design thinking frameworks and their knowledge of computer programming to transform the inequities that they see in the world. The last time I was in Cambridge, you may have read about it in the Varsity or in the Oxford Blue. There was a situation where I had to use my hacktivist knowledge to disrupt a racist digital attack that was directed at me during a formal in Hughes Hall. A fellow classmate anonymously airdropped a message that said, "I hate niggas," with a picture of George Floyd. George Floyd, rest in power, was an American Black man whom I happen to share my first name with. He was murdered by a white police officer in the United States. His murder mobilized protests globally for the preservation of Black lives. More and more people began to organize towards Black liberation from under white supremacist capitalism, carrying on the tradition of new African revolutionaries around the world. You may be thinking, how is all of this related? Well, I started programming so young because of the lack of control I had over my material conditions in the States. When I was 13, a Black boy by the name of Trayvon Martin, at 17 years old, was murdered for the color of his skin. His birthday was 3 days ago. He would have been 28 years old. I remember how useless I felt. I vividly remember how I felt like there was nothing that I could do to stop the white supremacist violence that was thriving institutionally through what I was learning in the schools, through the over-policing of Black neighborhoods, through the rampant houselessness across my city. Even the technology I fell in love with, the more I learned how to develop it, the more I got into it, the more I found that there was bias behind it. Hacktivism is where I found my strength and my focus to contribute and advocate for my community. Since then, I've developed various systems to connect Black and Brown students all across the United States. An app that combats police brutality, curriculums designed for students of color to use technology as a tool for transformative education in computer science and social entrepreneurship. It was those same skills that helped me hack into that Hughes Hall network and trace that airdrop back to the perpetrator. I used that evening as an example to show the dangers of anonymity within technology. Being the only Black person in that program, ironically, I did not feel alone. I did not feel useless. I felt called into action. I felt an obligation to transform that moment into something meaningful rather than let others stew in hate. I felt like I'd been preparing for that moment my whole life. That's why the importance of teaching these skills is intangible. I don't want to teach someone how to code so they can pour all of their time and effort into developing the next big platform out of Silicon Valley. I want to teach communities how to code so they can dismantle the traditional forms of oppression that are perpetuated institutionally, build new equitable curriculums, ecosystems, where we focus on collective problem solving through proactive organization. I chose not to be helpless when that racist attack targeted me. None of you are helpless in transforming the world's inequities. You have to find your power and use it. That's why I decided to create this lecture series with the intention to organize students, educators, programmers, artists, and designers to build the future that you want to be a part of. A future where the technology from the development to the user experience is equitable. A future where an education system does not reflect segregated access to resources. A future absent of white supremacy. Thank you. So now I'd like to introduce our next speaker. This speaker, originally from Cambridge, we met on Twitter, like he said, through an article that I wrote in the Oxford Blue. And funny enough, I feel more included in Oxford than I do here in Cambridge. But Cambridge was the first institution to invite me back to speak. So, Tyler Shores. He is the manager of the ThinkLab at the University of Cambridge and a senior research associate at the Intellectual Forum here at Jesus College. His research focuses on digital habits, social media, and how digital environments shape how we work, think, and learn. You can imagine the alignment. Prior to Cambridge, Tyler worked in online education at Stanford, served as director of digital textbooks at an international education nonprofit organization, and worked at the Google World headquarters in Mountain View, California, right next to the heart of Silicon Valley. While running the Authors at Google program, his various work has been featured in the New York Times, BBC, Wired, and many others. And the fun fact is, he was once on an episode of The Simpsons. Please welcome Tyler Shores.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone. Where's our clicker? What did we do with the thingy? Oh. Thank you. Thank you, George. So I'll kind of go through this quickly. Julian, help. I'm going to speak briefly about, oof, that was too fast. Okay, not that briefly. The reason, well, like George already said, I'm going to be talking a little bit, both from my perspective in Silicon Valley, working at a search engine company in California, and can we go back another slide, please? It doesn't matter. Yeah, that's good. Okay, thank you. So kind of like both perspectives, I'm going to bring this both from my tech side, working in Silicon Valley, big tech, and then also my Cambridge side, talking about some of the research stuff. So online discourse is the general gist of what I'm going to talk about over the next several minutes. I am putting, speaking of social media and stuff, I am putting my links online. So if you want to grab the interesting articles and things, they'll be online if I time this correctly right about now. So that'll be on my Twitter. You can find it. We'll post it later. Next slide, I guess. Yes, thank you. Next. So I thought I would open with a couple of questions here. So first question is thinking about online discourse. Again, darn it. Sorry, Julian, can we go back 2 slides? Back. Yeah, thank you. So think about the last time you had a really good conversation with someone online or through social media. And like, think, I have to think kind of hard. That's depending on the crowds you roll with, but like, what was good about it? Seriously, think about it for a second. Like, you know, did you learn something? Did you change someone's opinion? Did you change your opinion during that? So yeah, I want you to mull that over a little bit. And then conversely, think about the last time you had a terrible conversation with someone online or through social media. What was terrible about it? I know mine. Yeah, mine is pretty fresh in my head. What do you wish could have been different about that? So just think about it right now. And then next slide, if we can. This is just for context. This is a rough approximation. So from Internet Live Stats, it's close enough for our purposes, but the sheer volume of communication that's happening right now, right? In the several seconds it takes me to go through this, number of internet users, accounts, searches happening, blog posts, tweets, etc., emails. You get the idea. Are we trading pure quantity for quality is one of the things that I want to think about a little bit. So I'm going to just kind of quickly summarize because we don't have a ton of time. If we can, one more click, please. Yeah, leave it right there for a second. Does social media make us angry and outraged? Probably. I mean, so Yale researchers looked at a good 13 million tweet sample size, like pretty large sample size in these sort of things that more or less, it does seem like things like moral outrage and anger do seem to be more contagious. Like we know that like fairly conclusively now. The question that I asked at the top of the slide here, does it make us angry or outraged? Well, I mean, other people make us angry or outraged. Social media kind of feeds upon that and spreads that a little bit. And then it's not so easy. So I'm throwing this out there, but also mentioning, so this is the range of emotions available on Facebook, right? So you've got 6 things to pick from. Kind of hard sometimes. Like most things, we're complex emotional human beings. Most of us are complex emotional human beings. So we can feel different things that aren't necessarily covered under this limited range, even more so when it's liking or retweeting, et cetera, or upvoting and downvoting. One more click, please. Are we meaner online? I've been thinking about this for a while now, actually about the better part of a dozen years. It depends on what we mean. So this is just one normalized example. I could have picked almost any, but gosh, what was his name? Jim from The Office, John Krasinski. But this is a good example. It's like, it's kind of funny, but God, I feel bad. I was like, even if your job is to be a celebrity and to be well known, it was like, it still hurts to, have these sort of things, even if it's done ironically or as a thing. So when we're talking about anonymity and these sort of things, like there is something to this. Forgetting that there's a human being on the other end of it. Poor John. Poor us. Are we meaner online? Another click or two, I think. One more click. So I'll share these online too, but these are just more like questions. Thank you. So stop right there for a second. So moral outrage overload. I'll share this one from Johns Hopkins talking a little bit. I like Molly Crockett. She does excellent work at Johns Hopkins, speaking about specifically political discourse and things that we get that kind of permeate every part of our online lives now every day. And some of it has to do with pure quantity, that we simply have more resources. And it wasn't that long ago that the 24-hour news cycle was only a recent thing with CNN in 1993, 1994. So a lot has changed in the past 30 years when it comes to we can get access to information, we can get access to things that make us mad and outraged all of the time. I'm still interested in this question. I'm interested if other people in this room or online understand the concepts of hate follow and have any thoughts or reflections on that. I was like, why do we hate follow certain people, like former US presidents or celebrities we don't like? Why do we do that? And then this example is quite a infamous one, I should say. This was the Facebook study on emotional contagion. So this is infamous because they just went ahead and did it. So this was the idea of like, what happens if we have a mix of people and start giving them basically more negative news over time? Does negative news spread better than positive news and other things? Yes, it makes other people sad and depressed. So the problem was that they did it and just sort of said like, yeah, we did it. What's the big deal? It was in the terms and conditions. So it's not quite how we like to do research in general. That's a topic for another day. Yeah, let's talk about this one a little bit. One more click. This I have posted online, speaking specifically about, these are all samplers. These are all kind of like things to think about a little bit, but the Atlantic one is pretty good. So is the Neiman lab in terms of, actually one more click, please. Talking about some of these things in terms of like, well, ruining is kind of strong. I think that's a little clickbaity too, but certainly something has changed. Something has changed in terms of the temperature, the tone, in terms of how discourse happens online. This was a good example, a nice pull quote I thought that represented everything. So thinking about flame wars and strategic manipulation of the zeitgeist might just be getting started if technological and human solutions are not put in place to bolster diverse and civil discourse. So I mentioned that part because specifically more this than this, that we can't wait for technology to solve the problems that are necessarily happening all of this. It's kind of got to happen from us. So next slide, please. Click, click. Yeah, that one's good. So trolling has become into our lexicon here too. And we've had a weird last 4 or 5 years. I don't know how else to describe it in terms of like how things have changed in terms of trolling, Islamophobia, xenophobia, racism. It goes back more than just the past several years. But interestingly enough, what I was kind of like just doing some general research and thinking about this talk, this one came up awfully often. Dystopian, like this came up over and over again in terms of like how we feel now about the current climate of online discourse. Next slide, please. So this is just a quick snapshot, and then I am going somewhere with some of these things. So like I could have picked any number of platforms here, but the average tweet length, more or less, is in the 34 character range. So 4 to 8 words, depending on like how big of words we use and things like that. But it's something to think about. Shortness and brevity aren't the same thing as lack of depth, but it is something to think about in terms of like, we're doing this all in like, very bite-sized ways of communication now. So I'm not drawing a direct correlation with this, but I'm pointing this out as something to think about. Next slide, please. Yeah, we could talk about this one too. This is a whole nother thing. Like we needed a whole hour on this one. So like, actually, we'll come back to it. So skip this one. Yeah, later. All right. So many things. Click again, please. Stay here. Thanks. So this is one thing that I find fascinating. So I'm very interested in kind of like attention span in general, digital distractions. And then when we zoom out, I find this fascinating. Who did the research on this one? I can't remember. Somewhere in the US, I think. But the idea that our collective attention spans, like they looked at different trending topics, which I find fascinating. You can kind of do the same thing yourself on Google Trends to see like our collective attention span, because we have more stuff, more news, more stuff happening all of the time, the amount of time that we would talk about a disaster or a new thing or a controversy, like it's definitely getting shorter. And part of that is because there's so much information overload. So this isn't a fault necessarily with us. This is almost information triage on our part. So I'm throwing this out there as like another component of what's happening with online discourse right now. I'll leave on this note because I know up to this point, you're probably thinking this guy is bumming us out. But I want to talk about a few things too, to wrap it up, that getting worse is not inevitable, is an important thing here. A couple of ways, and I'll kind of leave it as an open thing here. But so this is one. I'll post this online too when I get a chance. But some of it involves going beyond, like thinking about our purpose when we're actually going online, and that is up to us individually. So 2 examples in terms of like, we're all guilty of this. I know I am. I'm a little bit of a know-it-all sometimes, but I'm working on it. But being able to say like, I don't know, letting yourself to be vulnerable to possible strangers or people you're interacting with. The whole idea is like, where do meaningful, authentic online communications come from? It usually means stepping out of our comfort zone, the things that we're used to talking about, the people that we're used to talking about, the people that are like us. This is where filter bubbles and echo chambers come from. One more slide, please. I'm gonna wrap this up a little bit so that other folks have a chance to talk. Next slide. Yeah. Yeah, leave it there. So like we've kind of talked about already, I don't necessarily know what the solution is, but there are things, so it's not all bad, right? The whole purpose of like social media, like we've talked about, the fact that we're even here together in the same room, serendipity, collective action that can happen together, building communities is a wonderful thing. It also has a bad side, a dark side to it. But this is kind of like what I'm suggesting, all of those questions I opened with in terms of like, what do we do about online discourse, the state of online discourse? I don't know the what so much, but I do know the how. The how is probably, next slide, please. That's it. So that's mostly like the how has got to be together, that we can't do this siloization of things anymore in terms of like how we kind of like this us versus them thinking about things. That's what polarization is in a nutshell. There's a lot to cover in like 10 minutes. So I'm kind of just throwing all of those things out there right now. Food for thought. I'll put those links on Twitter if you want them. Last slide, I think. Yeah, these are various ways to get in touch with me. On Twitter, not often on Twitter. So get it while it lasts before Twitter implodes. You can also email me. I like talking about these things. So if you have questions about any of this research or have ideas, let me know. But I think that's it for now. So I'm going to turn it over to George again. Yes. All right. I'm done. Yes. All right.
So one thing I wanted to highlight about what Tyler just said was when he's talking about like alternative solutions through online discourse. One of the things that I was talking about today in one of the interviews we were doing was how many people were reaching out and how many people were not reaching out in the way that they were when I wrote the article for the Oxford Blue. And one of the things that was the most interesting to me was so many people want to say, that was inspiring. That inspired me to do something here, or that was great. Some folks, of course, sent some negative comments my way as well. But the idea of the collective organization moving towards something, building together, that's something that Tyler had the courage to do, to reach out to someone that he's never met before. He's only seen me online. He's only read about me, and he wanted to help change and disrupt the culture here at Cambridge in a way that hasn't been done before. So I appreciate him stepping out of his comfort zone to collectively organize towards something very uncomfortable for so many people. So with that, I'm going to introduce the next speaker. Before I get into the bio, Adrita was my tutor in Oxford this summer. So I'm very grateful that she had made it all the way over here to speak with everyone today. Adrita Mitra is a DPhil candidate in global and imperial history at the University of Oxford. Her research excavates the intellectual and activist networks of Black women in King Leopold II's Congo and explores how notions of identity, sovereignty, community, and consent were articulated in opposition to colonialism. At Oxford, she convenes the Transnational and Global History Seminar. Please welcome Adrita Mitra.
We're gonna hope this works as yes. Okay, great. Hello and good evening. It's an absolute honor to be. Can you hear me? No?
It's a little quiet. Yeah.
I can just use that. Yeah.
Test.
Great. It's an absolute honor to be in such august company today. As George's introduction touched upon, I am a historian in training. I know very little about tech, and my experience in tech is very limited. So I won't even attempt to address that. We're all familiar with the old adage that a picture is worth 1,000 words. In my own research, I found that to be extremely true. I found myself turning time and time again to visual sources for new ways of seeing and, in effect, new ways of understanding. It is this fascination with the visual which I wish to probe a little bit further today. What I hope to explore with you in the next 10 minutes or so is the politics of seeing as we try to understand why we see the world the way we do. I'm going to do that the best way I know how, through paintings, maps, and poetry. It's working, great. Let's begin with René Magritte, a Belgian surrealist painter. This is one of Magritte's more famous paintings called La Trahison des Images, or the Treachery of Images. Through this painting, Magritte presents an intriguing and seemingly obvious apparent observation. The painting shows the image of a pipe and informs the viewer that ceci n'est pas une pipe, or this is not a pipe. Magritte's aim was to confuse, to evoke mystery in order to demonstrate that there was an obstruction between what we want and what we see. The obstruction could never be completely removed, as it was not in the object, but in perception of the object itself. This is an image or a representation of a pipe, but not an actual pipe. Through this painting, Magritte questions art's capacity to render reality and serves as a powerful reminder to the viewer that what we see is only a representation of what an object actually is. Oh, next slide, please. No? Oh, okay, thank you. Now let's probe this a little further. And for this, I'm going to use two categories, that of signifiers and the signified. Now, what's a signifier? A signifier is composed of both a material form and a mental concept, right? Say, for instance, the image of a pipe. It is a signifier because it signifies a pipe. A better example is a map. It is the material manifestation of an abstract concept. This, for instance, is a map of Cambridge. It is a signifier of this town that we're all in right now. Now, what is the signified? The signified is a material form. That is, it is something that can be seen, heard, smelled, touched, or tasted. In this case, it is the region this map seeks to chart out. That brings us to the question, is the map really representative of Cambridge? While the map is a signifier, the signified in this case is the institutions of Cambridge. It is the architecture, the people, the shops, the parks, the canals, the ducks. It's a signifier of you and me and of everyone present here. We're all the signified that is contained within this one map. The map is only a signifier, it is a representation of a space. While it can chart out the topography of a region, it still does not represent the multitudes a region may contain. It is therefore crucial to not mistake a map for the territory. It is a mere representation, it is a curation, and it is a man-made curation at that. To truly have an accurate map of a region, you would need a map the size of a region. I personally love this quote from Jorge Luis Borges's collection of short stories called On Exactitude in Science. It reads in this extract reads, "In time, those unconscionable maps no longer satisfied, and the Cartographers Guild struck a map of the empire whose size was that of the empire, which coincided point to point with it." Inherent in the creation of a signifier or a representation is a deliberate choice of what you want to include and what needs to be left out. So that begs the question, who decides what we see, or rather how we see it? Who structures the grammar of sight? In the absence of a viewer, there is no image, and an image needs to be consumed. And if an image needs an audience, it needs a creator. It is a vessel of communication from the creator to the viewer. We see what the creator of an image or a map wants us to see. Let us again go back to the map. We know the Earth is a sphere. There is no right way to view it. Why are we so used to then seeing the map of the world as it is? Why have we accepted this one view as fact? The center of the world is Europe, with the Pacific bordering the great continents. Let us take a few seconds to just look at this map. It is a little disorienting. Why is this representation of the Caribbean a little unsettling? The first time I saw this map, my initial instinct or impulse was to tilt it back on its axis, back into a place, into the way of seeing I was comfortable with, to make it fit into a way of seeing I had grown up thinking was the only way. We are only able to represent what we see, and there is no such thing as a view from nowhere. What is seen is often dependent on the position of the viewer relative to that of the observed, which is to say, the ability to observe and represent a thing is a question of power. The maps we are so accustomed to puts forth a very specific view of the world, a view that is so ubiquitous that we no longer regard them as a representation from one perspective. We often forget that there exist numerous representations from a myriad of perspectives. Choosing to accept this representation as the only representation as a fact accepts and legitimizes the power implicit in its production. Closely linked to this notion of power is the idea of possession. Before there were photographs, there were portraits. There were paintings. If you've ever been to an art gallery, you must have come across numerous commissioned paintings of women, children. If you look closely at the subject, they're often almost exclusively women, children, manor houses, estates, sprawling vistas, pets, prized stallions, cherished pets, amongst many others. The one thing that is often missing from these images is a guardian/paternal figure. It's usually the man of the house. Why in so many of these paintings is the male figure not present? Because he is the viewer. These are representations of his possessions, which are created for his consumptions. These representations are made to capture how he sees his possessions. In doing so, he chooses what he wants to highlight, to display, and what he wants to hide. This idea of possession is also inherently violent. Power wants to possess, stake a claim, and display its possessions. Power manufactures a representation of a signifier of its possessions as it perceives them. In doing so, it often ignores the agency of the represented or the signified. It builds boxes to fit its possessions into and presents it before an audience as the only possible way to view it. In closing, I would like to share a couple of lines of a poem by a Samoan spoken word poet, arts educator, and a community organizer, Teresa Tine Siagatonu. If you open up any atlas and take a look at a map of the world, almost every single one of them slices the Pacific Ocean in half. The audacity one must have to create a visual so violent as to assume that no one comes from the water so no one will care what you do with it. In closing, I would like us to reflect on what we see, how we see it, the powers at work behind producing what we see, and our position that allows us access into a very specific spectrum of sight, which is not without its blind spots. Thank you.
So this next speaker is as close to my heart as the others as well. And funny enough, when I keep asking this brother to send me his bio to introduce him, he constantly refuses. And I can't say I'm mad at him because his personality, his energy, his spirit, his soul supersedes the spoken word. I cannot articulate the experience that he brings, the presence that he brings into the space. The best that I can say is this brother is a cultural movement in himself. His identity, he has inspired me more and time again. It is an honor to have this brother with us here today. He is just about to finish up his fellowship at the University of Oxford as a Torch Fellow. And he is about to bless you all with an incredible presentation. Please help me welcome John Falsetto.
My paternal grandfather, great-grandfather, was a mbira player. The mbira is a Zimbabwean instrument. We played music in rituals, in ceremonies, to evoke the powers, evoke the ancestors' presence. We asked for rain. We asked for land fertility. We buried our dead. We ushered the dead from the grave into the spiritual realm. We passed our history down with direct instruction, with songs, with dance. Everything about the human existence existed within the notes and the vocal mbirations of this instrument. We never ever had a word for theater, for poetry or art separately, because we lived our theater. A rhythm is named after a drum rhythm. That drum rhythm is also the name of the dance. That dance is accompanied by drums and the mbira. Nothing is separate. And I remember one time my maternal grandfather said to me, "John, I hear you are," he was 85, "John, I hear you are doing music." And this is just the translation in English. He spoke in Shona. "I hear you are doing music in school." Yes, I am. I'm good at it. I don't want to hear any of that. And that hurt me. It struck me so deeply because this one figure in our whole family that I loved, that we all loved, the one person we would come and be with every holiday, the whole family with all his 10 children and all my 50,000 cousins. We would come to this man and to his wife, my grandmother, and just feel alive. And I was disappointed that this was the one person that told me not to do music. Until I understood that music was always a part of living rather than an entity you get money from. So I could understand my father not understanding why is it something we do every day. We sing because we are working and music soothes our soul. We bury our dead with this music. We ask for rain. We play music for the cattle as they eat grass so that they have a sound frame of mind so that when we eat, the cattle are also a form of wealth. Everything is just surrounded in this ritual and ceremony and our daily life. Music is breath. How is it in the world you live in, grandson, that someone can pay you for living? I went into high school. I continued doing music anyway. I studied O-level music and A-level music. At my school in Zimbabwe, I studied mbira as well. I've been playing this instrument for over 25 years now, but I still studied it. In school with marimba. I also studied Western music notation, music theory up to grade 8. And I played 7 instruments. Trombone was one of them, piano, and so on and so forth. But my exams at O-level, there was the Zimbabwean exam, the Zimbabwean Examinations Board. I could play mbira, record mbira, have a project specific to that. But the Cambridge exam was everything Western classical. And so I had to pack away all of this knowledge and all of this experience and talent for the sake of this one examination board that would be my gateway to studying further. Because if I stuck with the Zimbabwean Examinations Board, I would not be admitted into any other school internationally because they don't recognize it. Right? Fast forward to the United Kingdom. Entry into a music program typically requires you to have Western music theory and Western classical music. If you play an instrument, if it's voice has to be either jazz or it has to be opera or art, Western art, right? Requirements. Master's degree, PhD, you're required to have done O-level, A-level music, Western, an undergrad, a really high mark, but of course, Western, historical, musicology, and the likes. By the time you get to PhD, you have accumulated so much Western knowledge that you're given the rite of passage to then become a doctor of music, right? And Cambridge and Oxford are world-leading institutions, aren't they? They are. They are. At least they say they are as well. And at least they are recognized as being. How are these two institutions world-leading when the world only consists of the global north? When the world only consists of white education and history. So how is it possible that then they are world leading? Which world? Has the map, Adrita, changed? Has the map of the world changed? When white musicians in America go on a world tour, that's usually 60% of America, then London, then maybe Paris, France, then maybe one Asian city, and then that's the world tour done. So everything within our existence has got to do with satisfying the Western knowledge and perspective and demand and requirement. I cannot come to Cambridge and do a PhD or to Oxford on mbira. As an experiment, I did. I did speak to some music faculty members at Oxford about pursuing a research degree specifically on mbira, composition. And one of the professors told me, well, you see, this is the thing is, what scholarships in terms of Western music composition theories are you familiar with and are you read up on in your master's? And I said, well, I am not interested in the Western theories because there's a whole heap of knowledge and theories of music in just the mbira alone, that even the Western world, that even Oxford and Cambridge, the world-leading institutions, are not having on their curriculum. My project is specific to what I do, to what I'm an expert at. And it is Oxford and Cambridge that are the same institutions that, to have a DPhil doctorate in music composition, you could simply, I say simply specifically, you could simply do a doctorate and a thesis of 100,000 words on composition and not have composed a lick of music, but written so eloquently for 100,000 words, and you are a doctor of music composition without having composed a lick of music. And you then become a professor and teach composition at our very world-leading institutions. Composition. But the music composers who are actually composing music would never be anywhere near close to being experts of music composition. And so every single thing in our lives, we cannot talk about decolonization of ethnomusicology. Ethnomusicology itself, the idea that musicology is for Western art and music and the real home of music. And then everything else can fall into ethnomusicology because it is other. It cannot be on the same level of academic prowess as the Western art form. And yet our music cannot ever be performed the same twice. It's an improvisational culture, adaptive, adapts to the knowledge, functions on so many levels. And yet somehow the music and art of Africa is regressive. And yet if you walk in Oxford and Cambridge, most of the posters you'll find for concerts are for Brahms, Beethoven, Chopin. I'm guessing these are composers born in 2002. No, of course not. And yet somehow Africa is regressive and stuck in the past. But what I know for sure is my experience is, in order for all the work I've done as a musician, as a creative, and as a member of my cultural community, doesn't matter now. Do not applaud me now, even if you find out what I do, even if you think you like it. Because at Oxford and Cambridge, when you die, you become gold. Just die, make your way into the Bodleian Library, and you will have millions upon millions of students scouring through your life and hoping to find your journals and text messages and everything that plots where you went to have coffee. Oh, what seminar you spoke at GHTech in 2023 in February. Ooh, who was there? But as long as you're alive, Black man and Black woman, you mean nothing. Everything about your existence will mean something when you die. So maybe I should die today, because I'm hoping tomorrow that every single thing we stand for, all our cultures from our varied backgrounds, meet on a level playing field. As an actor, I don't want to have an all-black production of Macbeth. I want to be in a production alongside white actors and Asian actors. I don't want something that's othering on my own. I don't want to have a whole university on my own that's for Black people only. No. I can show you what I can do standing right next to you. So we cannot decolonize anything. We can't even stop that conversation unless we undo every single thing from the beginning of time that has influenced our paths to where we are right now. Because decolonizing now the curriculum at Oxford, Cambridge, any other university is snipping the trees. Because guess what next spring will happen? The branches will just grow again. Spring does that. The flowers just grow again. You need to uproot the tree, the source of where all this began, the beginning of it, the reason why at a young age, I studied music, but I had to study it in line with the Western narrative and the Western educational curricula. It funneled me straight through to this point. So I can't undo yesterday or today's curriculum. No, no, no. I have to undo the fact that right now, and I'm closing now, I promise. Right now, if you search on Cambridge Dictionary, the definition of mbira, the definition says simply thumb piano. If you search on Google, Oxford Powered Dictionaries, the definition of mbira, this instrument, is another word for thumb piano. Right? Thumb piano. The piano was invented past 1700s after the harpsichord. The mbira is over 2,000 years old. But yet somehow the definition of it is defined by an object that was created after it. And this is Oxford and Cambridge dictionaries, the very institutions you sit in right now. That knowledge of my instrument is incorrect. And then the pronunciation brackets are mbira, which is wrong. It simply is mbira. It starts the M with the M and not preceded by a vowel. So even the basic places we go for knowledge, Tyler, you showed us how many people are searching essentially live or using the internet. All those people, 3 billion people at this moment could search mbira and will receive the wrong information from the world-leading institutions. Yet our stance in this world is defined by our proximity to power with these institutions. Thank you.
You see what I mean? Y'all felt that, right? I know y'all felt that too. So we're gonna move to Q&A because there's nothing else to say about that one. Y'all gonna have to think about that one. So I'm gonna ask the speakers to come and let's join in these chairs. Move these a bit further.
Both in person and online. We could do in the room first. Would you like to start? Yes.
Let's move it.
Yeah, well, yeah, microphone.
Speak.
Yeah, go ahead, brother.
Cool. So for everyone that's spoken today, I've had a little bit of like knowledge or like pre-understanding of certain topics. So we look at maps, or we look at the way information is distilled, or the way that cultures are not segregated, but almost degraded and you know, in relation to the Western philosophy is almost seen as nothing. So for somebody who's aware of this and wants to change that, what am I doing here? And does that, in fact, perpetuate what we're all talking about now?
Does anyone want to take that one?
I think you should go first.
Me should go first. All right. So I've never been a full-time student of either of the Oxbridge institutions, right? This is going to be coming from my knowledge from the States and then my own personal experience here. I personally believe by you being here and acknowledging that tumultuous history, right? And recognizing that you're within this like post-colonial institution that makes you feel uncomfortable on a daily basis. You are perceived as that threat. Your presence here in general is disrupting that. So I don't want to say that you are perpetuating that institution, that colonial feeling, but you're going to feel that within the institution itself, right? Just in the structure and the architecture and what you're learning in the curriculum. So I guess the way I could answer that is by you fighting back, and whatever that may be, and whatever medium you use to do that, whether it's through writing, whether it's through locally organizing, having these conversations on a consistent basis. And then when you're talking about proactive organization, what alternative solution can you create to solve that issue? Because like John said, how are you uprooting that tree? I'm sure there's a myriad of ways to do it, but you got to keep figuring out how, you got to keep pressing on to break that down. Because like, these are giants, right? You're in these ivory towers and they were intentionally designed for you not to be here. So for you to be here, for you to try and disrupt that process, for you to be here in that seat, coming with those preconceived thoughts, you're actively uprooting that tree. So figuring out how to collectively organize and make that impact larger is, I think, the first step.
No, it's pretty good. I mean, my short answer would be, I don't know. The longer answer would be, all four of us are very different. We look at the world and approach the world very differently, and so do you. So I think the best way is to kind of think in terms of like, what do you have to contribute with your knowledge, your passion, your background, and like kind of figure out a way for all of these various ways that we're approaching these questions and see what you can have to add to it. Because last night we were talking about what we hope to accomplish with all of these lecture series is planting a seed. So that's what this is. Like, you know, we're trying to plant a seed here in the US, in the UK. So it's kind of up to you now in terms of like, what do we do with all of this? So we could use your help.
Find that power, brother.
My response is just a quick question. Do you know why capital cities essentially were nowhere close to the edge of the boundaries of the land? Well, essentially to protect the power, right? And then the capital city wouldn't necessarily be by the coast, right? It had to be inland somewhere so that there's just this greater distance to approaching it. And the best way to take down a city is not throwing stones at the wall outside. Is essentially, you have to be inside it. Otherwise, you cannot do anything from the outside. But it's not about taking down the institution. It's not at all, because I love listening to Beethoven, and because I was privileged that I was doing Zimbabwean music and all that music, and had the opportunity to learn other people's music. And I say other people because that's how I'm also perceived, that my music is other. And I've been privileged, but it's about making your claim in terms of what you want of the world, not of the institution.
We have time for a couple more questions. Thank you for the question, by the way. Can we do an online one, and then we'll see if there's any other ones? It's been. Oh yeah, sorry.
to it. I think it's been perfectly encapsulated by all of you.
Sorry about that. I wasn't sure if you were still thinking. Okay. Okay. Question from the online?
So there's a question from Lisa Bernhardt. Thank you for these amazing lectures. A question for George specifically, that I'm sure anyone else can chip in. How can non-tech savvy people get involved with hacktivism? What can they do to help?
Oh, that's a great question. I guess, for me, YouTube University. I've solved a lot of issues through using the internet and, what is it called? The process of elimination? Like literally just plugging away, asking any question. I personally don't believe that there's any stupid questions. I think when we're in these institutions, it's super easy to not feel affirmed in the discourse that we have and feel really uncomfortable, but we have to feel uncomfortable to grow, and we have to feel uncomfortable to learn something new, get out of our own bubble. So I guess I would say is tech can be very scary if you let it scare you. So Google, YouTube, ask, read, and I think that's how you can use hacktivism in your own way. It doesn't have to be, using your terminal and cross-referencing IP addresses to find an airdrop. It doesn't. It can be as simple as, I'm sure my 12-year-old brother in the crowd in the very back can teach you how to use some technology in his own way. And he's never asked me one question. So he might give you a better answer than myself. But yeah, I hope I answered that the best I could. Yeah.
Great.
Any question?
Any other question? I think we can fit in like 2 short questions. Let's try. Yeah.
Hi, yes. Thank you for the talk. I feel like I learned quite a lot from just like the different areas and just, new stuff which I never would have thought about. My question again is sort of focused towards George and things. I saw you talking about hacktivism, how you can like uplift communities of color and such. But we've sort of seen nowadays in the media and such that tech, especially AI machine learning, has these like racial biases coded into it. So how do you make sure that we can still use hacktivism to help uplift our communities without also bringing that same racial bias along with us in these conversations?
That's a great question too. Adrita, I feel like you'll be able to piggyback off what I'm about to say when it comes to perception. And so, with AI, right, we're using models. Yeah. And actually, a good example I could bring is like facial recognition. Traditionally, there's, been the dominant culture, white, whatever that is, I use a Y. And if we're looking through a database of white folks, if we're only taking photos of white people, right? And then I show my face on it and I'm supposed to be like, it's supposed to unlock my phone. If that database is only white people, then it's never going to recognize me. So I think it has to do with how we're gathering data and how we're using that through technology development, right? So if history is warped, if you're learning a warped curriculum, then you're going to be looking at the world through that warped lens, and you're going to think that's truth when it's not. So stepping outside of that and figuring out how to widen that net. How do you equitably gather that data and create and make those decisions, right? It's not necessarily hiring a bunch of engineers of color. It's hiring the engineers of color and bringing them to the table to make the decisions of what groups you're using to categorize that. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Let's do one more question and then we'll stick around afterwards in case anyone wants to do it in person. Yeah, one more. Can we do that one?
So we often think about these problems like they're engineering problems, right? So if I write enough code, I'll be able to do this. If I compose enough music, I'll be able to change mindsets. But is that the right approach, or should we take a step back and go back to the map, so to speak, and sort of look at these things from a larger perspective and then go back into the engineering and then start to rebuild, right? Because right now it seems like people are writing a bunch of code and building a bunch of things that are optimizing problems or optimizing solutions that can't possibly work. So is that the right way to go, and how can we rethink that?
Any takers?
I would start with what John said about throwing the stones at the castle walls, because there's a little bit of a question of critical mass, right? Like we can always, I guess we even use a lot of your analogies. So like if we're kind of talking about how to just like trim the top, which sometimes is what it feels like, it's hard to just start over from scratch. Like, you know, when people talk online in terms of like, oh, the next Google or the next Facebook or the next whatever, is like, there ain't going to be a next whatever those are. Those were the right things at the right place in the right time. So I partially feel like the answer has to come from working within, but culture change is hard. A place like this, it's super hard. A place like Google, it's super hard.
Impossible. That I'll add to.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because I wanted to add you sort of answered your own question and with the way you asked it. Humans are dynamic, right? They're not binary. So you're not going to be able to, I remember when I was an engineer, like full time, and I would be coding for hours and hours and hours. And then I would leave my room and then I would go outside and try and talk to my family. And it's just, we're not going to have a like beneficial conversation. It's just not going to happen because I'm in this linear thought process to where we're not going to be able to connect or relate any experience. I have a lack of empathy because I'm talking to a machine for so many hours. So there's no way we can solve like the issues with humans coming from a linear standpoint. But like you said, there's a way to rebuild with both. It's a balance, right? I believe it's a very vast spectrum, and it's figuring out what parts of your brain, what side of your brain do you need to use here? And then what side of your brain do you need to use here? Because technology is the way I've solved a lot of problems, but it's exacerbated so many of my problems as well. So it's figuring out when's the right time to be linear? When is it the wrong time to be linear? I would consider right now, at this moment in time, we need to be more empathetic. And we need to continually be curious. I would say that. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, this may sound very radical, but this is just my thought process. I'm happy to always talk about it sometime. But change for me, no one can change anything external. The real change happens within. Meaning, if a particular person doesn't change themselves, there's nothing you can do. There's no amount of anything. Even if you tore down the physical world and rebuilt it, the change that needs to happen is within the person. When we look at racism, the change is not about how many more Black people do we let into Oxford or Cambridge, how many more Black people are on the theatre stage, and so on and so forth in positions of power. It's not. What needs to change within that sphere is the perspective of white folk. If we're talking about racism, it's not about what is performative and done performatively, because the problem will always be there. Otherwise, it's putting jam on top of burnt toast. What needs to happen is a reckoning that no one can change externally. I cannot change anything about you. That has to happen from you as an individual if we're quarreling about something. So really, it's about responsibility, accountability. If there's anything that you can change, it's yourself. Everything else you'd have no power over until that person decides they will change their perspective. And then everything else will change. Otherwise, all these institutions, all these theater, and I'm an actor in theater, there's a lot more white actors on stage in film. All it takes is just a next casting or a next interview period for universities to make this place really diverse and inclusive. That's all it takes. This little intake 2023 can change immediately. You could change Oxford and Cambridge. But the question is, why doesn't it happen? Because of the perspectives and where the power lies. And that's where change needs to happen, not with us, not from us.
Like I said, like all of you have the power to transform the inequities you see, right? It's all in your hands. I recommend reading Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. I think it's an incredible blueprint when it talks about decolonizing the mind and then how do you proactively organize towards decolonization externally. So shout out to East Oakland for that one, because it's where I was raised. How short are we on time?
Pretty short. I think we should wrap up. Yeah. We will stick around afterwards. This has been recorded. So thank you all for coming, joining us in person. That means a lot to us. Thank you to everyone that's joining online.
Thank you, everybody. This was an incredible kickoff event. Y'all didn't even see the 30 minutes before, but I can tell you our presence here was like real uncomfortable and we had to set it. You know what I mean? We had to fundamentally change some stuff before we got to it. So thank you for bearing with us. And I hope we inspired some creativity.
Thank you.